Have you considered that sex is a drug? Maybe you don't know, and I'm sorry I'm not sorry. And if you do know, then you know good sex is like a drug. So, like most drugs designed with the intention of healing the body and the mind, there are some side effects. If sex was a bottled drug, it would read, please take as recommended. Common side effects are listed below: muscle fatigue, insomnia, cognitive absence, inattention, dependence, euphoria, pregnancy. Least common side effects include mental health concerns, including but not limited to anxiety and depression, sexually transmitted disease, jealousy, and stupidity. What's the prescription of the drug sex? Its pharmaceutical name, also known as intimacy or the no. Used frequently, Genesis 1:28. Best used in marriage, 1 Corinthians 7:9. Take with partner unless agreed upon otherwise in advance, 1 Corinthians 7:5. Sex is a biblical mandate. Engaging in sex is like another way of worship. You're saying, thank you, God, for making our parts fit in such a miraculously intoxicating, mind numbingly spectacular, exorbitant way. I digress. All I'm saying is, sex is like a drug, and all drugs have prescribed use to gain best benefits and maintain safety. So, have you considered the prescription?
Hey everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our weekly installation of F.L.O.W Presents. Today our topic is sampling or not. We are having a very candid conversation about whether premarital sex is necessary in order for us to make a decision on whether we're going to marry somebody. So, before we begin, I want to give everyone, all of our panelists, an opportunity to say hello. All right, guys, you're up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nina.
Hi, everybody. I'm panelist 1.
Okay, so realizing that we probably are all choosing to pretty much say anonymous, we are just going to keep going. So before we actually begin the conversation, I just want to lay some ground rules. So the first thing that I want everybody to know is that you have 2 minutes to talk. If you go past that 2 minutes, your mic may be muted. I also want you to know that we would love for you to share your opinions, but we're asking that you would refrain from using profanity, and please be respectful, of other people's opinions. And lastly, the best way to get my attention is if you use the raise hand feature. Okay, we good? Okay, so we have already posted a poll on YouTube that our people in the chat have already filled out, and their question is sex or not. But before we give you guys that question, I'm going to ask you how you view sex. Like, what do you feel like the purpose of sex is? And we'll start with panelist number 1. What is your view on sex? Like, what do you think its purpose is?
Yeah, that's all about me.
Oh, sorry, are you unmuted? Be sure to unmute yourself.
Sure. That's a good question. I think it's a multi-purpose tool that we've been given. Obviously, the one that we are most familiar and most excited about is the pleasurable component. But I also think it's a way to connect with someone on a deeper level. And it's also an act that, provides some level of peace and serenity right afterwards. I mean, but ultimately, I think sex is just something that we've been given to, to explore and to receive and extend pleasure.
Okay, Panelist number 2, would you like to give your input?
And I say this coming from a Christian worldview. I know not everybody subscribes to that, but that shapes a lot of this in particular, because I believe that God was very wise in how he designed us as humans, and sex is created for us for a variety of things, one of which is to be able to have kids and be fruitful and multiply. But another really critical, important part, even for people that were barren in the Bible, is that sex was for connection. Sex was for building intimacy, and sex was something that would separate man and woman that are one from anyone else that they had any kind of a friendship with or anything else. That to me is why what sex is for. So intimacy, connection, personal enjoyment, as well as procreation.
Okay, great, thank you. And we'll go to panelist number 3 now.
I think panelists 1 and 2 did a great job of defining what sex is for. I agree, it's for multiplying, and it's also to establish a connection between you and one other person.
Okay, we're gonna go right down to panelist 4.
Hi, so for me, I agree with panelist number 2. Sex is to procreate and also for connection.
Okay. Panelist 5.
Hi, so the Bible says that we are to be fruitful and multiply. And how do we go about doing that? Sex is our tool. I equate sex a little bit like food. God gave us food as energy sources for our bodies. God could have made food something bland that we just take and it fuels us and we keep it moving. Food could have been fuel in the same way that we fill our cars with gas and they don't say yum or yuck or in any case. But God gave us taste buds so that we take the original gift of food, which has its purpose, and then there's pleasure that comes from the food. You see what I'm saying? So there are different gifts of God have different benefits and different attributes. It's not just this, that, or a third. The purpose of sex is procreation. There's absolutely pleasure, connection, therapy. There's an element of therapy in sex. But at its core, it's a gift of God. That's the way I see it. It's a gift of God. And we're going to talk about how the Bible speaks on this gift and what parameters are around this gift. But at its core, it's a gift of God that has a purpose. But as with all gifts of God, prophecy, food, whatever you want to call it, we can take it left.
Okay, thank you. All right, panelist number 6. I think we're at panelist number 6 now. What do you feel like the purpose of sex is?
I agree with what everybody else has said already. It's a form of procreation. It's a form of pleasure. You can. It's also a way to be intimate with your partner. Obviously not the only way, but it's a primary way of you being connected with your partner. It could be therapeutic. It could make you relax. So I think it's a really multifaceted tool or activity that you can do.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, panelist number 7, what are your thoughts?
Initially, before everyone spoke, I wasn't really too sure what the purpose was, but I do think that, you know, according to the Bible, we know that sex is, it was for procreation, you know, for children, but there's many of us that don't care for kids, or don't care for kids right now at this point of in our lives, but we still engage in sexual activities. So I know procreation was like the #1 reason, but I'm not sure. I like what I think panelists, was it 4, 5? Five said about the whole food and the car and the gas, kind of what he would. I kind of like where he was going. I do think in a relationship, sex kind of helps fuel the relationship, helps keep the things moving smoothly. And I guess it could be used as all the other things that people mentioned, like forms of therapy and connection and communication. I've heard it before said that sex is a form of worship. So I'm not sure. I'm not really sure, but I know it's a whole lot of things.
So I just want to put out there that my question is it is not a test. So if you have your personal opinions on it, there's no answers that we're expecting here. It's whatever you feel like the purpose sex serves for you. So it does not have to be anything theoretical or anything. Just like, what does it do for you? I just want to put that out there for the rest of this conversation. You don't have to worry about saying something that's like politically correct. We really just want to know your thoughts and your opinions. Okay, so we are going to just go ahead and ask you guys, sample before marriage or not? Now, I just want to reiterate that the purpose of that we're using the word sampling for the context of this conversation as having premarital sex. So just want to know what you guys are thinking. Do you believe it's okay to sample or no? So we'll start with panelist number 7.
Oh man, so I'm in the middle. I think
Okay.
I want to say no. I don't think it's okay to sample. However, I can understand some arguments and support some arguments that say it's important to sample before marriage. But I think I'm undecided right now.
Okay, that's fair. All right, I'm gonna be calling at random. Panelist number 3, sample or no?
I'm kind of a panelist 7. Honestly, people gonna do what they want to do, and they're gonna say what they want to say for whatever reason they have. I personally think you should not, and that honestly does not have. It has something to do with the Bible, but my main reason is not really from the Bible. So
Okay, and that's completely okay. All right, panelist number 4, what are you thinking?
So for me, I think had I been asked this question years ago, I would probably say, yeah, why not? But now where I'm at in my life today, I say no. And that's just through my personal experience.
Okay, fair. Panelist number 6, what's your opinion? Sample or not?
Yes.
Okay, so panelist number 6 says yes. What about panelist number 2?
Nah.
Nah. Panelist number 5?
So in the context, and it's interesting because it feels like this is a different question rather between sampling with the person that you're intending to be betrothed to and premarital sex, right? So on one end is the question, is premarital sex okay? Or are we specifically talking about with the person that you are intending to marry?
That's a fair question. So the answer is the period. Before you have sex, before you sign the papers, is it okay to sample? So whether it's the person that you're engaged to or the person that you're dating and trying to figure things out with, is it okay?
I think that sampling in and of itself with the person that you're intending to marry might have some benefits to it. Here's why. The way that marriage has evolved from a biblical time to now is what informs my thinking. At a certain point in time, the women were so dependent on the man. If you look at the Bible, the status of women is always dependent on her husband. Her finances are dependent on her husband. Her spirituality, her place in society. We look at the story of Ruth and how her daughters, once their husbands died, she was like, go off and do your own thing. What I'm trying to get at is at a certain point in time, women weren't leaving the marriage. Nowadays, what's one of the top 3 reasons that people divorce? It's finances, and sex, right? And if we can look at one way of looking at it and saying that, you know, what does God hate more, premarital sex or divorce? What does God hate more, premarital sex or adultery? So,
Okay. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you? Were you saying something?
I'll see.
Okay, so thank you so much. I am just observing everyone's faces, and panelist number 4 seems like she has some thoughts. So I'm just gonna go ahead and let her jump in here.
Yeah, so I don't ever think there's gonna be a question of what does God hate more. If we're going by what's in the Bible, there's no one sin greater than another. And also, if we're going by what's in the Bible, as long as we repent, as long as we give our lives to God, God will forgive us for our sins. So I'm not, for me, it was just like, just answer the question. That was what was going through my mind, like sampling or not. It doesn't matter whether it's somebody you are about to marry, because at the end of the day before you about to get married, they could say, I want to marry you. So it doesn't matter what the circumstances is. It's very just white and black. You're not married. Is it okay to have sex? And I think that in a lot of ways you were beating around the bush. So excuse me, because I can't cover my facial expressions and we're here on camera, but it's just, is it okay to have, and I feel like when we start creating these loopholes as to, oh, if this is why it might be okay, that's when you start kind of like trying to create your own Bible. So it's just, if it is okay, that's cool. If it's not okay, that's cool. Whatever your choice is, just be secure in your position and say what's on your mind, but not going around all of these loops trying to find an answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, so Kenny.
Yeah, so not beating around the bush, panelists 4, but we're having a conversation. And sure, I can say yes, no, whatever, but it's also good to elaborate and provide context. That's, in my mind anyways, why we're even here. We can poll and just say yes or no and keep it moving, or we can start bringing in dialogue.
Okay, we had a couple of hands up. I apologize, panelist number 1. Take the mute off.
Yeah, I mean, I never answered the question, so I'll just answer
sorry.
it.
Yeah.
My own personal answer to that is nah. I think something that we do, well, nah, because of my personal convictions, but I think you should go based on your personal convictions, and if the Bible is the source that you refer to, then you should base it on your conviction as the Spirit leads you in terms of interpreting the Bible. I say nah, but that's just my personal conviction. But I think sometimes we do move the goalposts, or we do kind of, set our standards based on what we perceive to be reasonable or practical. Having said that, many people fail. Doesn't mean that the standard needs to change. We have grace. We have, a Father that is not as harsh as we are to ourselves sometimes. So I say nah, but acknowledging that we've fallen short, and myself included.
Sorry, so I see 2 hands up. I'm gonna go with panelist number 6 first, and then we'll go with panelist number 7. And then we actually have some questions from the YouTube chat.
I agree with a lot of what panelist 4 was saying. The decision to have sex is very, very personal, first of all. So it's a personal decision that you make on your own. And you use a lot of different resources, such as your connection with Jesus Christ, the Bible. And maybe you want to utilize other resources that by using your discernment and the Holy Spirit leading you can also help you make a good decision, whether you should have sex or not. Because there's a lot of things in the Bible aren't really made explicit in regards to sexual activity. So you have to kind of go outside and read for yourself what is sexual activity is to you, and what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And then you make a decision based on that from the Holy Ghost leading you. It's a really, really personal choice. And frankly, it's nobody's business. So you decide for yourself whether you want to have sex or not, and not be, I guess, what's the word? Not be, I guess, not really bullied, but not really have a critical, you need to have a critical analysis of why you're doing certain things, which include sex.
Okay, we'll go ahead with panelist number 7 now.
Okay, I wanted to just say that I understand what panelist 5 is saying. This question, it's like a yes or no. Are you with premarital sex before marriage or not? Like it's a simple question, except it's not that simple, because I feel like there's sometimes where guys, maybe not trying to generalize, but will be more okay with having sex with someone that we're not going to marry. Panelist 5 says that I think he mentioned that it would be more okay to have sex with someone that you were going to marry, but I think me and my guys probably disagree with that. If we're going to marry you, we'll probably just wait until we marry you. But if we knew that there was no future and that this wasn't a serious relationship, then, what did panelists one say, that we mess up sometimes or we make mistakes and slip in? I'm not sure what he said, but we would be okay with those decisions if we weren't gonna, if this wasn't gonna be anything serious. So that's why I think this question is like premarital sex with people who you're not gonna marry. Okay, yes, we're for that. But then if we're gonna marry you, then premarital sex is a no. So that's kind of how I'm with him. And not to just change the subject, I don't know if this is going to be asked by somebody on YouTube or if it's a question for down the line, but sometimes, not to generalize, but to generalize, women would want a partner who has sexual experience before. But I think that's all I have.
So panelist number 7, I actually want to thank you for bringing that up, because now I have a question to pose to the ladies. So we have heard that it's a lot easier sometimes for men to have sex with somebody that they're just having a good time with, and they take it more seriously with a female that they are intending to marry. Is it the same for women? Do you feel a bit more comfortable? Making or slipping out with somebody that you are not planning or intending to have a future with than somebody that you're considering marriage with? Do you feel like it's the same thing?
So for me, I would say that's difficult to discern, because you could be dating or dealing with somebody that you think you're going to spend the rest of your life with, and that doesn't happen. So how do you, are we talking one night stands? I don't think women have as many one night stands as men. Maybe they do, but not the women, at least that I know. Or are we just talking you're dating, you're talking to somebody, you're getting to know them, and you have sex with them? I think that's a different kind of expectancy, So yeah, maybe for women who jump into relationships, I think for women, we often are like, oh, we're gonna marry this person. We love this person on day one, and that might not be the case. This is infatuation or lust. It might be difficult for us to discern whether it's lust or love, and we need to do a better job at that. But I'm not sure about the question to answer it.
Okay, that's fair. So panelist number 3, just curious about your thoughts. Do you think that it's easier for a woman to have a sexual interaction with someone who they're not serious about versus someone that they're intending or thinking about being serious with or getting married to?
I feel like it's easier to do it with somebody who you're not about to like be serious with. Only because you don't really have to talk about it afterwards. You don't have to, well, how did you like it? How was it for you? How are you feeling? Like you don't gotta do all that. So I mean, if you're gonna be with somebody, obviously you want the sex to be enjoyable. So you guys will have that conversation and you want to make them happy. But if it's with somebody who you don't got no future with, you ain't gotta have that conversation.
Okay, before I go to panelist 5, because he seems like he's, the wheels of his mind are turning a little bit, we're gonna go to panelist number 6, and then we'll come to you.
I think it depends on on the situation, but I do know of some women who just want to just have sex and that's it. They just they meet together, they have sex and then they leave. It's not rocket science, it's not anything further than that. It's just a release for them. So some women do that. Others may not. I mean, everybody's not a monolith. Everybody's different. So it just depends on where they're at, in their lives and what they want, really.
Okay, go. You can go ahead, panelist number 5.
Well, my first thought with respect to the question of whether sex impacts men and women differently, I'm not sure that the distinction is entirely gender-based. I feel like historically we've painted men as aggressors and women as the defenders of chastity. But
Interesting.
over time, I mean, beginning with the 60s when we were bra burning to 2020, when women are antheming that they are the savages, classy, bougie, ratchet, whatever you want to say. But more importantly, I'm curious because this might help to even further shape this conversation about the ages of the people on this chat, because it's one thing, and panelist number 3, forgive me, I do not want to come at you, but that mindset that you do not want to discuss sex, and that, hey, after you have sex, it's very important to have those conversations, right? Whether it's your spouse or whether it's somebody, especially if you intend on having further relations. I mean, that's not a conversation we should run away from. And ultimately, what I'm getting at is, in the church especially, I applaud F.L.O.W for having these conversations, but that's the issue, right? Where we tend to want to run away from these conversations in the same way articulated by panelist number 3.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your opinions on that. Oh, we have someone's hand up. So we're gonna go panelist number 1 and then panelist number 2.
So I wanted to kind of go back to the purpose of sex, just because it was kind of on my mind. Several panelists, their reasoning for or belief for sex being for existing was to procreate and for therapy or something like that. But a few of the panelists didn't mention pleasure. And, I wonder how much of that is, perpetrated through or by the church, that pleasure shouldn't be a reason for sex. Separately, I've noticed, it might've been panelist 4 that said a lot of her friends, a lot of women she knows doesn't have one night stands. And this is kind of tacking on to panelist 5's discussion about women's, how women are perceived throughout time. And I think that kind of helps to explain why women don't even feel comfortable being candid about this conversation, topic, especially nowadays where You're seeing more women, infatuated by sex, male parts, female parts, porn, but still feeling ashamed to talk about it. And I'm wondering how much of the discussion in the church should just reflect more of where we are in society, and should liberate women to be able to just confront this just like men are able to confront it, and just be real about it. Because I can tell you, maybe perhaps some of your friends that are not telling you that they've had one night stands, it could be because they need to protect the way you view them.
So I just wanted to reiterate just how much we appreciate everybody being so open and or willing to have this conversation. I know that sometimes this can be a heavy topic, but as panelist number 5 said, we need to have more discussions like this. It's really important. I realized that I did not give panelist number 3 the opportunity to respond to panelist number 5, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that really quickly.
Yes, panelist number 5. So I heard what you said, and I respect it. But at the end, I heard you say, something about if you are moving forward with that person, the conversation is necessary. And I agree with you. What I said in my statement was that if you are not moving forward with that person, then the conversation does not have to be had after the interaction with them.
Okay, thank you. Panelist number 2.
Yeah, so real quick, first, I will say I think the church does a horrible job at embracing what is God's. God made sex, and oftentimes, even as Christians, we let the world define what sex means for us, and it unfortunately has left a lot of people disappointed, a lot of people confused, a lot of people also upset, especially when it comes to their marriages. And I just wanted to speak to the part about using, I guess, that premarital period to see if you're going to enjoy sex in marriage. This conversation has so many facets. I'm sure we'll get to other stuff too, but specifically that point, it's I think it makes sense initially that you would try that, and you want to make sure that you want to enjoy sex with a partner. But if you really think about what marriage is a lifelong commitment to each other. And sometimes people at the end of marriage aren't having sex at all. It's not all about sex. At the beginning, of course, you want to make sure that that is on and popping. And I think it's funny still that people say, let's test this out. Because I know some people that actually were having sex for years prior to getting married. Once they got married, sex changed. Sex changes for so many different reasons and so many different ways during marriage. So test driving initially doesn't necessarily guarantee that after you get married or 10 years later, that it's going to still be the same thing. I think on the flip side, especially as Christians, we need more Christian sex therapists. We need more open dialogue. We need more open education. Why can't we talk about technique or this, that, whatever it is? There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm a healthcare professional. There's nothing wrong about talking about some of the things that actually make sex great for somebody, and learning how to build that intimacy sexually, emotionally, mentally. All of that is part of the process of marriage. So I think
Okay, I think you just got muted because you overextended your grace period. But to your point, panelist number 2, I am actually with you on that. And that brings me to the next question. Because you brought up something valid, that some people feel like they need to test drive the parts before they actually, I guess, purchase whatever it is, right? So the question is, because, like, this brings me back to a conversation that I was having with some of my girlfriends, and this is a thing for females too. Like, what happens? There's a very real feeling that before you get married, if you don't have sex, you don't know what you're getting yourself into once you get married. Like, what if the parts are not big enough? Or he doesn't know how to please me the way that I like to be pleased. Isn't that an argument in favor of test driving or sampling? What do you guys think about that? And I'm gonna start with panelist number 3, because I see your face doing all types of stuff right now.
I mean, I feel like that's always going to be a conversation. I mean, they're not going to be exactly what you want, regardless of how much you want them to be. I feel like if you love them, then you're always going to have that conversation about what can we do to please each other more. Or even if you guys please each other at one point, and like you said, the text change, you guys might want to have that conversation about what can we do better? What can we do to spice things up more? Speaking from experience, before I got married, things were one way, and when I got married, things changed, and sex ended up being a problem. And honestly, in the beginning, it was pleasurable, and at one point, it turned into a chore. So I understand that, like, you're always going to have a conversation.
Okay, we're gonna go to panelist number 6, and then we'll go to panelist 4.
Well, in regards to like the whole sampling before, well, first of all, with the size, just because it's a big size doesn't mean that it's going to do a good job, and just because it's small, it doesn't mean that it won't do a good job either. I mean, I think for me, education is key. So even before you get married, even if you're single, you need to know about your body, you need to know about sex, read, look at a video, gain the knowledge so that you know what you want. And
Now,
then when
hold up, panelist 6. When we talk about video, I need you to be specific on that. What are we talking about there? Are we talking about an educational video, or are we talking about
a sex educational video by a sex therapist? Like, for example, the love, I think it's called the Love Hour with Kev on stage and his wife. They have great conversations about sex outside of marriage, in marriage relationships. That's a great tool. But just in general, just learn. And then when you get to that point with your partner, talk about it. And then if you're getting married, in premarital counseling, talk about it again. It's really about communication and education, really, to me.
Okay, so are you saying that that's not a reason to sample before you get married?
I'm not really saying it's a reason not to. I think you still should, to me.
Okay.
Because it's a really complex answer for me. But I don't want to overtake the conversation. But I'll just say that I still think you should sample. Okay.
So sorry. So we're gonna go to panelist number 4, and I just want to shout out Avery because I saw him. I saw panelist 7. Sorry, I saw him taking notes. So I just wanted to shout. Oh, and panelist 2 is doing the same thing. So I just wanted to, point that out there. I think it's panelist 4.
Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Okay, so there are people who say that it's important to engage in premarital sex because they want to make sure that when they get married, they're not going to be dissatisfied with their investment. Sometimes it's about parts not being big enough or a concern that maybe the chemistry is not there. So the question is, do you feel like that is a good reason to sample?
So for me, I don't feel like that's a good reason to sample because I feel like if sex is the end all be all in the relationship, then maybe that person is just not the person you should be in a relationship with. Like if you're gonna make a decision on whether or not you're gonna move forward with this person solely based off of whether or not they're good at having sex, then that means they offer, well, when I'm interpreting it, it means they offer nothing more than good sex for you. That means any other good quality they have does not measure up to the fact that they're bad at sex. So it's like, why even waste your time? If that's what's going to be what is going to decide that for you. And I 100% agree with panelist number 3 when she says it might be one way in the beginning and change over a course of time. That's marriage. Nobody gets into marriage just to be in a marriage for a night or for a day. You get into a marriage just to be in it for a lifetime. If things stay the same, honestly, I think the excitement is in finding ways to make things get better over the course of time. You wake up to the same person, you do everything with this person, find ways to, spark it up outside of just sex too. So that's my input. And I have, I need to respond to panelist number one, because even though you said like a lot of my friends might not feel obligated to tell me things, I think in a lot of ways we need to recognize that when I say the women that I know, I'm talking about the women I'm closest with, the women that are completely transparent with me and I'm transparent with them, meaning I could tell them I did X, Y, and Z with my husband and they could tell me they met a dude on this day and they did whatever with him. But most of the women that I know, don't do that. A lot of the women who come to me for advice, they do have one night stands, but I don't know them personally to, speak about them on this panel. I can only speak about the women I know and why they choose not to have one night stands, because as panelist number 5 said, there is a greater stigma on women who have sex more loosely than men. There's a greater stigma, and women are now reclaiming who they are and ownership of how the world is going to view them. And I think we need to recognize that. But at the end of the day, women who have sex a lot are viewed by men as hoes, or they're viewed by men as whores and sluts. And we have to recognize that those titles have been on women for ages. And it's just now 2020 when women are now saying that they're savages, because they're like, you know what, F what the world thinks about me. All that matters is what I think about myself. And I think we need to recognize that, especially pertaining to sex.
Okay, so we're going to go really quickly to panelist 7. Remember to take your mic on.
All right, sorry, I forgot. I've been trying to talk for the last 7 minutes, but let me see. I wrote some notes down. I was gonna say, how do we know what good is? I think this is the challenge that we have. Like, where do we get the bar from? Someone was talking about watching educational videos, and I'm sure in those educational videos, you're not seeing like, oh, that's what good sex looks like. I think that we're getting a definition from either past experiences or, I'll say it, pornography. We have, wherever the standard is for good sex, I don't know where that's coming from, but I feel like if two unexperienced people have never had sex before, how am I going to tell, like, who are we to say this is good or bad? Like, what do I know? Like, we haven't done anything before. So that's why, that's one argument for like, we shouldn't sample, because if you got two virgins, we both messing things up. We don't know what's going on here. Everything is good to us. Now, if you have one person that's, test drove and sampled and whatnot, then of course you're going to have problems. And then of course you're going to have questions about, what you, I don't know, what you guys are talking about size and other things from my virgin ears, but you're going to have these questions when one person has more experience than another person. So either both people have experiences of sampling and test driving, so that we both can say, all right, look, this is how I like it. Because somebody said that too. It's like, how am I, how are you going to know how to please me? So I think that should be said, is that either it's going to work with two unexperienced people, or somebody's going to be teaching the whole way and complaining the whole way, or it's just going to be difficult. The last thing I will say is I agree with panelist number 4. There's a double standard, and women and sex in the church is not as easy as a conversation, because she's absolutely right. It actually bothers me to even think about women in such manners and these images, because my mom, like, I got sisters. So I'm with her. Like, this is a difficult conversation to have, and it would really bother me as a man to hear how women are living their best lives and being savages with good knees. So I would like us to continue just to, like, just keep being innocent, you beautiful women out there, please.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Panelist number 2, I see you, but I wanted to give panelist number 1 a chance to respond to panelist number 4.
Okay, so panelist number 4, much respect, no disrespect to your crew and those that are close to you. And you very well may be speaking, and they may be speaking truth with you. I have no reason to doubt that. I'm just saying, and probably to further the point, I think you helped further my point, which is we live in a society where men are more likely to boast about their sexual prowess than women. And I know women that have not felt comfortable enough to share things with women that are very close to them. So I'll just park that right there, and that is what it is. Ultimately, a relationship is built on trust, and you know, as far as like driving or test driving and sampling, you know, if it's your conviction that you're not supposed to be doing something and you find yourself doing it, first of all, let's stop calling it a struggle or stumbling, like you did it. And you probably put yourself in a position to do it unless you really struggled or stumbled. Secondly, to panelist 3 point, yeah, things change over time. You know, I'm married. You know, things change from honeymoon to both people in their careers, you know, day in, day out, to having kids, to trying for kids, to having multiples. So, I mean, you know, things change, and I think we would be foolish to drink the Kool-Aid and make an excuse for why we should sample and just call it what it is. We're weak, and we chose not to, you know, rely on. If this is our conviction, actually, we're weak. We chose not to rely on and pull on the source that we have, and we need forgiveness.
Okay, so gonna come back to that point, but I wanted to give panelist number 2 a chance to express himself.
I just thought it was funny how people are talking about, you know, worrying about how good it is. I mean, how do you know that food is good? Did somebody tell you this is how food has to be? This is, you taste it and it's good to you, or it's not good to you. Sometimes some people like Mexican food and some people think that that's nasty. You figure out what's good for you, and that can change over time. I used to hate avocados, and I actually now eat guacamole. So to what panelist 7 said about whether it's two virgins or somebody else, or you figure that out between the two of you, and that's that. The other thing is, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about sex and how good it can be and all this other stuff. I mean, people talk about in the chat, I saw something like all night long and whatever it is. There are different aspects to that. Well, people talk about climaxing and this, that, whatever it is. Studies have been, and I can pull up data, but studies have been shown women take longer to climax almost all the time in general. That's just the way that the male and women parts are made. The vagina stretches to hold to give birth to a baby. So I don't know what we're worrying about size and length and whatever it is. It accommodates whatever is put into it. I mean, anyway. Let me stop right there.
Okay, thank you. So I'm actually going to a question that we got on YouTube, and somebody wants you guys to clarify what you consider premarital sex is. Like, what do you think it is? And they're talking about on the lines of, or speaking on the lines of, is it oral sex? Is it dry humping? You know, like, where do we draw the line when it comes to what constitutes as premarital sex or sampling? And I'm going to start with panelist number 5, just because I'm looking at your face right now.
What's interesting with sex in general is that there are so many different levels, right? And what we tend to try to do in the church is we tend to try to make it black and white when it's a rheostat. There's gradients of gray all along, and that question kind of points to it. If you think sex is bad, premarital sex is bad, it means in all form. It means in the form of oral, anal. If the appendage sex is attached to whatever prefix you want to put it, it's related to sex. So that to me is it's a pretty simple answer. Sex is sex.
Okay, so sex is penis to vagina, or sex is all of that?
All of that. All of it.
Okay. So thank you. I'm going to go to panelist number 1, and then we'll go to panelist number 3.
Okay, now I'll just add something simple. I mean, even cyber sex, you know, phone sex or whatever you want to call it. I mean, you know, once you're connecting with someone, perhaps yourself, and once you're connecting with someone, for the purpose of achieving something that is intended to, give you pleasure, that will, ultimately culminate in you ejaculating, then that's sex. I think I know some, I know some, I've known some people that, wanted to hold their virgin card a little long because they didn't do the traditional and they did everything else. And I'm no judgment at all. I'm not the one to judge, but at the end of the day, you did something because you really ultimately wanted pleasure. That's why you did it. Whether or not you went the whole way, that's all I got.
Okay, panelist number 3.
Just to be clear, that we're still talking about the question of what is sex, right?
Yeah, what constitutes as sex in your minds?
So I think this is why it's so important for the church to really to stop being afraid of this topic, because growing up, I thought it was just intercourse, like, vaginal intercourse, and that was that. I actually grew up with someone who was only having anal because they thought that was not a form of sex, which is totally not true. And I agree with, I think it was panelist 5 or 1, I can't really remember. But when you guys were saying about how there are different forms, and now when I was growing up, someone who was in the church, who's a pastor, told me it was because we actually had this conversation when I was a teenager, and they were like, it was the arousal of any sexual organ. And I felt that was a pretty defined, topic, but I feel like they still didn't really give it to us raw like that. But I mean, yeah, I feel like the arousal of the sexual organ could be a pretty good definition of it, but I feel like Panelist 5 said, there are a lot of gray areas with it.
Okay, thank you. So I see panelist number 7 and then panelist number 4 we're going to go to after that.
Hello? Yeah, all right. So to answer the question, I think sex is male genitalia and female genitalia, or actually not just the genitals, but also like the mouth. So like oral sex is sex, and then when they connect and there's intercourse like this, it's sex as well. Somebody mentioned anal sex, that's sex. What I don't think is sex is cyber sex. If I had a cyber, look, if I'm a virgin and I'm engaging, I don't know what cyber sex is, but if it's anything like on the phone, or if I'm typing somebody and I'm saying like we're having sex right now, I'm still a virgin. So yeah, because then we got to talk about masturbation, because it's masturbation sex. And I don't think that masturbation is sex. I think masturbation might be a little wrong, just a little bit, but I don't think it's sex. So I think my definition of sex is penis entering vagina, or penis entering mouth, or mouth entering vagina. And I think they put and other things like that, but things that involve the body parts physically connecting, that's sex to me. By P2, ask P2. He works in healthcare. He said he's good with the sex stuff.
Okay, we're actually going to go to panelist number 4 because she was next, and then we'll go to panelist number 2. It actually looks like a lot of people have thoughts around this. So after we get through these 2 comments, we're going to talk about that. Panelist number 7 said that masturbation does not constitute premarital sex. So I want to know what your thoughts are after these next 2 panelists speak.
So for me, when I worked in the New York State Assembly, there was a woman who was sexually assaulted, but he only penetrated her anally and orally. So when it came time to charge him, they only charged him with sexual misconduct, because under New York State law, anal penetration and oral penetration were not considered rape. Then the Assemblywoman I worked for passed legislation to include those 2 areas into also forced vaginal, forced anal, forced oral. So from my perspective, anal, oral, vaginal, and in some ways, cyber sex, they do constitute sex, you know, because the act of ejaculating. So I think when we're talking about whether or not it makes you a virgin or not is a whole different conversation. But when we're talking about whether you are committing the act of sexual immortality or sexual activity, then yeah, it's sex.
Okay, we're gonna go to panelist number 2. Then I'm gonna go to panelist number 5 because I think he had something to say. And then again, we're gonna go, oh, sorry. We have quite a few people that have things that they want to input. So panelist number 2, and then we'll go to panelist number 5. Unmute yourself, please.
I think part of the difficulty with this part of the conversation is that we're trying to decide, is sex an on or off thing? Is it a black and white thing? Is it a yes or no thing? And I think panelist 4 was, I agree with her about the fact that there's a spectrum. It's a lot of things can be considered sexual activity, even if it's not actual coitus, the medical term, or intercourse. So, I mean, intimacy isn't on or off, and the same thing with sex. I think in terms of virginity versus purity, I think that oftentimes the church focuses on virginity, and I think it's much more important to focus on purity of the mind as well as purity of the body, because cyber sex, even if you're not having carnal knowledge, which is part of the definition of what a virgin is, having carnal knowledge, physical knowledge of someone, even without that, you're still going places with your mind and your body that God does not want you to go yet. So if we're using that as a baseline, you know, you got to look at that. I think that sex is kind of like the square and sexual activity is the rectangle, if you guys understand what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, we should be putting our boundary not at the square. We shouldn't be trying to find as much as we can get away with. We should be trying to find out where we should be and what's appropriate, and also the consequences, which I'm sure will come up on talking about soon. But
Thank you for that. Okay, so we have quite a few people with their hands up. So we're gonna get to those people. Panelist 5.
Real quick, could I say one other quick thing?
Go ahead.
Sorry, the reason why I include that, somebody actually mentioned this in the chat, like fondling or dry sex also, or things like is kissing somebody's nipple. Is that did I have sex? Well, no, you didn't actually have sex, but did you conduct yourself in sexual activity? Yes, you did. So just as an example.
Okay, thank you. Panelist number 5.
Yeah, so panelist number 2 stole a little of my thunder there, but yeah, that's where I wanted to go. The question is between virginity versus purity. What I found interesting in my own study, in Deuteronomy chapter 22, we have these lists of sexual of consequences, which when we're looking to define a term, it's because we want to determine where the line is, right? So when you look at Deuteronomy, it's interesting that, long story short, there's all these rules, but if a man found a woman who was in the streets or in the field, and he seized her, is how the Bible defines it, when it's really rape or seduces her. And if she's a virgin, then that woman has certain benefits that come her way. That man cannot divorce her for the rest of their lives. He is stuck with her. But I found interesting that the Bible made clear to say that one of the conditions was virginity. For the woman to be protected, provided for, she had to remain a virgin, which to me kind of helps to explain the narrative of the church with protecting virginity versus purity. As we transition into the New Testament, we find that there's more of an emphasis on purity. And I'm interested in getting into what the term sexual immorality is, and I hope we get to discuss that at some point. But you also have to look at it contextually. I'll see the rest.
Okay, so we have panelist number 4, and then panelist number 7, and then we're going to change directions a little bit.
No, I didn't have anything to add. I stand by
Okay. I was just looking at your face.
No, sorry. I was reading. Sorry.
Okay. So then panelist number 7 and panelist number 2.
I think I just wanted to mention that purity is new to the conversation. We were really talking about sex, and that's why we were defining it. But I agree with everything P2 said and P5. Those are my guys. I just think that when in a relationship, if we start to talk about purity, then of course we're talking about a bunch of different things. We're talking about dry humping. Somebody mentioned kissing the nipple. To be honest, if I was pursuing a relationship with a girl or a woman and she mentioned that her nipples were kissed, she dry humped, she kissed, she has some cyber sex, she's a virgin to me. Like, that's just I would actually, if I had to choose between a woman who had coitus, is what she said, P2, and a woman that was out here having cyber sex and doing dry humping, I'm choosing the dry humping girl. Because in my mind, she's still a virgin. So that's just the way that I see it. But then I would have to ask more questions, because I just don't think this is a fair conversation sometimes, because what about erections? What about men getting aroused in a relationship? I'm dating a beautiful woman. We go on a date. She gives me a hug. Is a hug okay? What if I get an erection during this hug or while we kissing and stuff? Like, am I now sexually impure or sexually immoral? Is this a tally against my purity now? So I understand what you guys are saying and I get it, but I do think, how do we date? How do we date then? Like, what do we do if we can't do the kissing and then whatever else comes without that line? So I do think it's important to define what sex is so that you can be in a healthy relationship without coitus.
Okay, so panelist number 2, you had your hand raised as well.
Yeah, good points, P7. Some good points there. I just simply wanted to ask, and I think that a lot of this is framed by the fact that we believe in God, most of us here and some of us watching, and that sets the context. There are some scientific or medical consequences for sex or no sex, but this really is more a morality issue, and that's a kind of your spiritual and your moral beliefs issue. And so I ask these questions: what does God want from us? How does he want us to act, and why? Is whatever it is that we're doing pleasing to him or not? And what do you want and why? Ask that of yourself with everything that you do. What does God want and why? And what do you want and why?
Thank you so much, panelist number 2. And we actually are going to get a little into that just toward the end of our discussion. So thank you so much for bringing those things up. Thank you. Okay, so panelist number 1, you look like you had a comment. Am I right about that?
Yes. No, I kind of want to harp on something that panelist 5 said, and that's kind of the focus, the shift from the Old Testament to the New Testament, from just laws to heart, and kind of how that shift hasn't really taken shape in the church, where we really do value, like P7 was really like, yeah, if she dry hump, she a virgin, and I want her. I'm like, well, what about her heart? What about your heart? What about my heart? I mean, ultimately, I just feel like we place a lot, and it's really, societally, has been pushed on us, and even just from a cultural standpoint in the church, if she can say that she's a virgin, then man, I got something, as opposed to someone that might have lived maybe a wayward life before, but their heart is gold. I don't know, I probably want her. So I just feel like we put the emphasis on these physical, marks and lines, and that actually is the danger that I feel like we just as believers fall into, not just with sex, but with other sins, is once we can say we didn't go this far, then we really don't need to ask for repentance. We really good with God. but he knows our heart.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We're actually going to shift just a little bit because there's a question coming from the YouTube chat and they want to know, is sex mental? Do you guys believe that sex is mental? One of the arguments that a lot of people give about not having sex is that it's easier sometimes for a woman, similar to what our panelist number 4 was saying earlier, to get attached a lot quicker once sex is involved, and it kind of blurs our mind when it comes to making a decision. So the question is sex mental? And is that a reason why you should not sample before marriage? And I'm going to start with panelist number 6 because we haven't really heard from you.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay, the question is sex mental? Is sex mental? And also, I just want to let everybody in the YouTube chat know that we are about to put up a poll for that. So the question for everybody right now is sex mental?
I think it can be. Yeah, it can be, because I think to truthfully have the most out of sex, you really have to have that mental connection, be in tune with one another. So I definitely think that sex can be mental for sure. And if you are connected together on a mental, spiritual level, then from what I believe, I think the sex will be much greater, because you're in tune with one another. You can read each other's body language. If you hear a certain sound, that may mean that it's great. If you don't hear any sound, that may mean that it's not great. So I think it's definitely a mental thing for real.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any opinions on that? People want to know, do you think that sex is mental? Is that a reason why we shouldn't sample before we get married? Panelist number 4, it looked like you were saying something.
Yeah, so I definitely think sex is mental. I was thinking of the name of, I think it's called endorphins, but I could be wrong. But when we have sex, our brain literally releases these endorphins. And I think in a lot of ways, that's how it connects us to the people that we're having sex with. And yeah, I think it's mental, emotional, like all these things are tied into that because endorphins are connected to so much things within us. So yes, I do think it's mental. You're on mute.
Yeah. I do agree. Sex definitely has a mental component. Real quick to P4's comment, endorphins are released, dopamine is released, several different chemicals that are related to things that we find pleasure in other items like food or even other drugs. Those things are released in our brains and throughout our body. Oxytocin specifically is the chemical that helps create that bond, that kind of feeling, that connection, so to speak. But I personally would say, again, going back to the question, sex is everything. Sex is like a culmination of intimacy. And I think that is part of the reason why it should be experienced in the highest form of relationship between two humans, which is marriage. Sex is, if I use macaroni as an example, you could have really bland Kraft macaroni. We could have really good macaroni, but that really good macaroni doesn't just have the noodles and a little bit of cheese in it. It's got some other stuff going on in there, and it was made in a certain way. And I think sex is kind of like that. Sex doesn't have to have that, which is why some people seem to have good sex with just the basic stuff, like just the mechanics, just the one night stand chemistry. But really good sex long term includes spiritual, emotional, mental, social intimacy, along with the physical aspect and the physical technique.
Thank you, panelist number 2. Panelist number 3, I saw you nodding your head. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree with everyone to an extent. Sex definitely can be mental, emotional. It can be all those things. but I honestly feel like it's that way if you make it that way. Like it's a choice. Like I feel like going into something, you can make it a choice on whether you want this to be mental, whether you want this to be emotional. Now, I do feel sex, affects you in one way or another, whether you believe it does or not, especially when you have sex with multiple people. Like, I feel like you kind of harbor their energy in a way. Like, some females, like, they can't figure out why there are all these different things. It's because, like, sis, you had sex with like 10 niggas, 10 different dudes in one weekend. So I'm saying, like, so you really do, like, you can't figure out why you're feeling this way, and it's because the guy you had sex with yesterday felt this way. So I feel like it can be that way whether you wanted to or not, but it also can be a choice in some matters.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. Oh, panelist number 7, I see your hand up.
I agree with the last panelist that spoke. I do think that you can kind of turn that off and on, especially in today's generation with the young people that we're dealing with. It doesn't have to be mental, it doesn't have to be spiritual, physical, all those things. It could just be sex. And people have made that very clear. Like, yo, this is what we're here for. We're just here for this, and that's it. I'm not trying to connect. Don't look in my eyes. Like, we're just here for this. But I do think that there's a huge mental aspect, and it can cloud judgment and other things. I want to comment on P2 and other married people who are on here, and I'm really disappointed in you guys because apparently married sex is the best sex ever, and you guys have been holding out like with these secrets. I think that we don't know enough about the greatest macaroni and cheese. All we get is the crack. And you know who's giving us the crack? What's that woman? The stallion, the woman with the good knees. Like society, hip hop culture, popular culture is giving us the crack. And all you married people over here in your little married houses and married corners holding out on the recipe for the greatest sex of all time. And I'm very, very disappointed in you guys.
I am so sorry that you're disappointed, panelist number 7. Do any of the married people on this panel have anything to say? I see panelist 6 has their hand up, but I wanted to, he directly addressed the married people. So do any of you guys have any secrets?
I'm a newlywed.
That's what panelist wants to, that's what he wants to know.
I'm a newlywed. So for me, it's as great as it was and the day we got married.
Of course.
Okay, so we're gonna go to panelist number 7.
Sex is not perfection. 6. I mean, it's just like any other thing in a relationship. It goes up and down. There's different things. Sometimes it's, oh my gosh, and then sometimes it's like, all right. It's going to be different for different people, but I don't know. I think it's just something that develops over time if you are intentional with it.
And I'll say this: I think married sex is the best sex because it's like renting versus owning. I mean, you can be sure that the work that you're putting into this, what you're learning about yourself, and as and as you relate to the other person and about them, you can be sure that you can use that in the future to get better. From just a pure physical standpoint. Obviously, there's the emotional security and all other aspects of it that you find with someone that you don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to be there 2 weeks from now or 2 months from now. I don't think just because it's married sex it makes it great. I know a lot of married people that aren't having sex. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really what you put into it. But I think it ultimately what panelist 2 was referring to when he made his comments earlier was that you're investing in probably the safest place so that you're sure to kind of just go up from there. I mean, if you wanted to, you have to want it.
Okay, panelist 6 had a comment.
No, I was agreeing with panelist number 1. Just because you're married doesn't mean that you're having the greatest sex ever. You don't know what that person, what those two people are going through. You don't know what they did to get to that point of having great sex. So I wouldn't just say just because you're married, you're having the greatest sex, because that's not true. I mean, you could just be in a really committed relationship and not be married and still having the greatest sex. And it just really depends. I think just in general, the church has done a really poor job in showing what pleasure is in a relationship, in a marriage. Because from what I was taught, you're supposed to be Ellen G. White, or I'm sorry, well, yeah, okay, Ellen G. White, you know, if you're a woman, you know, keep your legs closed, suppress all of your sexual feelings. And then all of a sudden, when you get married, you turn into Little Kim, or you turn into Meg the Stallion. And it's not that way. Like, you got to talk things out. You got to teach us what we should be thinking about, or what we should be asking, and why is sex pleasurable in marriage. That's what's important. You can't just say, don't have, wait till you're married to have sex, and not give a really good evidence-based analysis why. It's very important. I'm all about statistics, reading, and just knowing all of my resources so I can make a good decision that lines up in the will of God. That's just me.
Thank you so much. Okay, so y'all, this has been a great conversation. We have two more people that we're gonna go to, two more panelists. That's panelist 7 and panelist 5. And then we are going to shift to one more thing, which is more church and sex, which is sort of what panelist 6 was alluding to. And then we're gonna wrap it up. So thank you so much. We're gonna start with panelist 7.
So just a quick rebuttal for 6. What I was really saying was, I'm not saying that, I know that marriage doesn't mean great sex. I'm saying that all we have been given is don't have sex, don't fornicate, don't have premarital sex. But what the married people are telling us, or what we're hearing, is that sex is intended for marriage, and this is the best sex of your life. This is it. Where sex is the best when it goes down in marriage, right here. So what I'm saying is that we're not enough married people. We're not being sold on married sex. Does that make sense? That's what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that these guys have the married people understand it. They have the secrets, and instead of us hearing more about why married sex is so good and why it's the best sex for you to have, where that other people are telling us is just like, it's just sex, or we're being told, or whatever. But we're getting our information from other places, when I feel like we should be getting our information from the people who are having the best sex, like the healthiest sex, however you want to phrase it. But whether it's good or not, sex in God's eyes is the best sex when you're married. And that's my point. I'm saying that they're having good sex, and those who are not sex are having bad, or those who are not married are having bad sex, or they just shouldn't be having sex. That's what I'm trying to say. So I just want that to be kind of clear. I'm not saying that's going to be perfect. I'm just saying that in that context, that's when it's the best. That's when it has the potential to be perfect.
Thank you so much, panelist number 7. Panelist number 5.
To panelist number 7's point, and this is not a point I can make, I remain unmarried, but I've heard it, right, that married sex is the best sex, and there's some good sex happening on the unmarried side. But a lot of the anecdotes that we read, and I recognize a lot of our married couples here tend to skew younger, but a lot of the anecdotes that we read tell us that a lot of married couples cease having sex. So maybe the reason, panelist 7, that they're not sharing that with us is because maybe it's not that good, or somebody's.
That's a little deep. Okay. Panelist number 2 had a comment, and then we are going to pivot to sex and religion.
So I just want to be real clear. The mac and cheese thing, although I appreciate Avery's comments and everything, the mac and cheese thing was more so about one component of sex plus all the components of sex. And those multiple components of sex are best realized in a long-term intimate relationship in marriage. So, you know, Kraft mac and cheese versus Thanksgiving mac and cheese. So the spiritual, all that's all those extra ingredients combined. And I think the other aspect is that the long-term effect of Kraft mac and cheese sex and the long-term effect of Thanksgiving mac and cheese sex is different, kind of what P1 was alluding to. So, and P5, you're right. Some married people are not having good sex, but it is the best environment to have good sex. It's just that we have royally messed up what God gave us.
Yeah.
And we've let the world and we've let sin mess up what God has given us. So yeah, some people aren't telling the truth. Some people are just like, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's all right. But I have had plenty of brothers telling me that they have had plenty of problems and they've been open with it. And I think we need to be open and honest. And I will be open and honest and say, me and my wife's sex life isn't always, and I said it already, it's not always on 10. It's not always 100%, but it is a beautiful thing. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do to help other people realize that.
Okay, so to that end, a lot of you have said repeatedly that the church is not doing a good job of being transparent about sex, period, whether it be to panelist seven's point about the church not being open about techniques, whether it be to panelist number 6 point about not educating people. So my question is, what are some of the things that the church can do to be better at helping people as it relates to sex? You know, we're always being told not to have sex before marriage and that fornication is wrong. But a lot of people are worried because some people say, well, you know, what if I get into my marriage and I can't do it right? You know, some people want to sample so that they can have the practice before, or they want to know what good sex is so that they can say, this is, you know, what we need to be doing. So my question is to all of the panelists, what are some things that you think that we could do a better job of as a church community when it comes to educating each other or supporting each other around sex? And how transparent should we be? Panelist number 6, you had your hand up, I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, I think, first of all, the church needs to have definitely a safe place where there's no judgment, there's no negativity, where a person just feels comfortable to express themselves. Because church in general is not a place where you can do that, because people are always going to judge you, what you say, and then take it out of context. And it becomes a big mess. So first of all, we definitely need to have a safe space for people to express themselves and what they're going through. The second thing is of like full education, meaning getting psychologists, nurses, just anybody with just some type of sexual expertise to teach about sex, from the spiritual aspect, the mental aspect, physical aspects, bringing in books just to show everyone what sex is all about. And then based on that, and then personally with the Holy Spirit leading the person, they can make a valued, like a real decision. And just also it needs to be, we definitely need to be more truthful in regards to what's going on with sex outside of the church and inside of the church. I know for me, I was raised in a purity culture type church, where I was basically told just to shut off all of my sexual feelings, all of my thoughts, and just let it lay dormant, which is a problem because, you know, they expect us to get married when we get in college. That didn't happen for me. I read all the books. I did all the workshops, still not married. And I have to sit here and just be in heat until I get married. So, but what if I don't get married? You know, what is it there for me to do to kind of help me still maintain my sensuality but not sin against God? So it's really like I think definitely it's a hard subject to talk about, but we definitely need to talk about it for sure. Just education in general.
Thank you so much, panelist number 6. And I actually wanted to pose that question to YouTube. So the question that I wanted to pose to YouTube is based on what panelist number 6 just said. What if you're not married by a certain age? How do you deal with your sexual desires and sexual urges when the church doesn't educate you on these things, and they're telling you not that you shouldn't have sex outside of marriage? Like, what are you supposed to do about that? How do you handle those feelings? And for our panelists, I wanted to go back to the question that we have now, which is, what could the church be doing to better support people when it comes to, or our community when it comes to sex and religion? Panelist number 3, I'm gonna go to you.
I think having classes about it will help a lot. We have plenty of Bible studies. Why can't we ever make one about sex? It obviously needs to be facilitated in a certain way. It should be age appropriate, everything like that. But like for me growing up, like everyone else said, we were just taught not to do it, and that's it. Like my mom didn't even let me take sex ed in school when I was growing up, because she was just like, you don't need to learn about what sex is from them. And I'm just like, well, I ain't learning it from anybody else. And at the end of the day, as cliche as it sounds, you know, you're going to get it from somebody else. You're going to get it from the world. And unfortunately, that may be in a negative light, which is why some people lead the sex life that they do, because they were taught about it in an incorrect way. So I feel that the people who have the knowledge need to not be afraid of it, but spread it in a safe way.
Thank you so much for your input. Does anybody have anything else that they'd like to add to that? Okay, I see 2 hands, panelist 7 and then panelist 2.
Not exactly sure what the church could do, just because this is like there's a lot of factors involved. Because if you kind of bring the church in, then there's some beliefs about oral sex where people, I don't know, it wasn't asked here, but do Christians have oral sex? Is that an okay thing? Because I've heard different opinions. You know, one of our panelists mentioned something about anal sex. Since I was a kid, and if you're from a lot of Caribbean culture, that's a big no-no. That's like, don't even touch that. So, but then there's some Christians that might be okay with that. So, I mean, it's a very sensitive topic. And then the other thing is that you guys mentioned hardware. Everybody's hardware is not the same. So when you begin to get in the church of men and women and you want to talk about sex and functions and techniques and stuff, it might be sensitive for men with different hardware. I don't know. I just know that it's a challenging topic. What I do think that would be very beneficial if we did hear more about the beautiful side of sex. Not so much about the techniques or whatever, but if we heard like what makes sex so special, you know, kind of getting the value back. You know, sex was given to us from God, and if we can kind of explore what that even means, you know, just the sacredness and the holiness of sex, if we can just go down that path, because panelist 3 is right. We don't even have sex talks. It's just do it when you're married or don't do it at all, and there's no in between. So if we can kind of start to bring in some in between, that would be beneficial. It's a good start. That's all I have.
Okay, panelist number 2, and then we're going to go to panelist number 5.
So I might need a little bit of grace time, because this is near and dear to my heart, and I get upset about this a lot because the church, whatever. Anyway, I think the church needs to do a better job in general of applying Bible to life, because the Christian life is everything in our lives, not just a section, not just on the weekend. And that means teaching things even beyond Bible study. I heard somebody say, have a Bible study on sex. That'd be awesome. And then even beyond that, teach us about certain things, whether it's finances or sex itself or other stuff, cooking, whatever. But I think the church should take a stepwise approach. There needs to be sex ed for prior to puberty. There needs to be sex ed around puberty. There needs to be sex ed as you go to college. There needs to be sex ed for young adults dating. And there needs to be sex ed for people about to be married. And then there needs to be sexual coaching, actual in-depth sexual coaching for those that are married, because it's not always easy and different people have different issues. Some people may be perfectly fine, some people may not be. I hated how there wasn't somebody said people say they say don't have sex, but nobody ever talked about how. Nobody ever talked about those specific instances, examples. Walk me through it. Let's role play saying no. Let's role play being like Joseph, because I'm not used to this. It's not gonna click like that. My body's clicking in the other direction. So figuring that out. Also talking more about marriage itself, because it's not just the sex. When sex is disappointing, how do you handle that? When marriage is disappointing, how do you handle that? We need to be able to accept that, because that will happen. Marriage is for rich or for poor. If my wife all of a sudden has cancer or has some diagnosis none of us knew about, we have to learn how to deal with that. Just like we would have to learn how to deal with not so great sex life at first. So we can't just be, oh man, this sucks. I'm out. Like, so.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to panelist number 5.
I don't know that the church can. So here's a counterpoint, right? First, the church is a collection of families, right? So there are some topics that aren't appropriate for all ages. That's number one. Number two, the church is a collection of a wide variance of people. You have some with low sexual urges. You have some with extremely high sexual urges. And that's a beautiful thing, especially if you look at it in the context of sex as a gift from God. And God loves diversity. And diversity also means in your urges. But the issue is, at least the way I see it, the church can't even define what is permissible in terms of sex. The Bible, we have so many different translations that talk about what is forbidden, what is verboten. And some say fornication is wrong. Some say it's sexual immorality that's wrong, which is a whole different subset as found in Leviticus 18 of incest, bestiality, and especially adultery. You look at the original Greek language, the word Paul kept using is porneia, which doesn't necessarily mean premarital sex. We're looking at sex in terms of, in that culture, remember, these are the ancient Romans who had a predilection to pederasty. Grown men and younger boys who were engaged in sexual relationships. And Paul is like, look, don't do this at all. And I'm not espousing my own personal beliefs here, but I'm articulating some of the difficulties in even having this discussion within the church. I think most importantly, though, what the church needs to do is look at this topic honestly, and not from a viewpoint of having a bias, or not from a viewpoint of trying to drill certain people's perspectives, but it's being honest about what we as humans, our evolution. And I think P7 said it, that we need to look at it, or P3, bring in experts. Let's not run from sexual therapists and doctors and so on and so forth. Maybe have smaller groups and engage these experts to help us with these conversations, because if anything, church is family.
Okay, so I just want to say thank you. We have reached the end of our discussion this evening. There was so much more that we could have gotten to, but unfortunately time is escaping us. So I just wanted to close with a short wrap up for each one of you. Gonna ask again the question. This is how we usually do it. We ask the same question at the beginning that we do at the end. So my question to you again is, after having this robust conversation, sample or not, you can each respond from panelist 1 to panelist 7 with sample or not. And that's how we're gonna wrap up our conversation. So we'll start with panelist 1.
Nah.
Okay. Panelist 2.
Nope.
3.
Nah.
4.
Nah.
5.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. 6.
Yes.
Okay. And 7. You're on mute. Still on mute.
Gosh, no, I said no.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining this discussion. We are going to close out with a word of prayer, and we're asking for the panelists to stick around for a debrief after this. And also, thank you so much for everybody who is commenting on YouTube. So let's just pray really quickly. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for just giving us these spaces where we can feel safe to share and communicate our opinions and our thoughts with each other. We pray that you would bless each and every one of us and help us to make decisions that are decisions based on what you want for us and what we know that your purpose is for our lives. We ask that you would bless each and every one of us as we go throughout this week. And we thank you for hearing and answering this prayer. In your name we pray. Amen.